Imagine owning 80 acres of pristine private land only to have a group of power-hungry neighbors tell you what you can and cannot do on it. I'm talking about a homeowners association that thought they owned the entire valley. They thought their clipboards and matching polo shirts gave them the right to trespass on my family's estate. But they made one critical mistake. They forgot that my property line started exactly where their jurisdiction ended, and when they showed up at my massive solid iron security gates demanding entry for a mandatory inspection, I didn't just say no. I locked the gate, walked away, and triggered a legal war that would cost them everything. If you want to see how one landowner completely dismantled a corrupt HOA using nothing but property law and pure defiance, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss how this ended. The tension began on a Tuesday morning. The sun was barely up when a white crossover vehicle pulled up to my perimeter fence. Two people got out holding clipboards and digital cameras. They didn't knock. They didn't call. They just walked right up to my primary security gate, which blocks the private 2-mile driveway leading to my house. Through my security cameras, I watched them type random codes into the keypad, trying to force their way in. When that failed, they started rattling the heavy iron bars. That's when I walked down the drive to meet them. The man who introduced himself as Harold, the HOA president, didn't even say hello. He just demanded that I open the gate immediately for a neighborhood aesthetic compliance review. I looked at him, then at the massive private property, no trespassing sign bolted to the iron bars. I told him he had exactly 30 seconds to get off my driveway before I called the county sheriff. Harold laughed, claiming the HOA bylaws gave them total access to any property within the community borders. But Harold didn't know the history of this land. He didn't know that my grandfather had bought these 80 acres long before the surrounding developer ever broke ground on their cookie-cutter subdivision. As the seconds ticked down, Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out a legal-looking document, holding it up against the gate. He smiled a smug, confident smile and told me that if I didn't press the button to open the gate right now, they would fine me $5,000 per day, lien my property, and eventually seize the land entirely. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't blink. I reached out, flipped the master switch on the gate box, cutting all power to the keypad, and walked back up the hill without saying a single word. They were locked out, furious, and shouting threats into the wind. But as I reached the house, I realized something terrifying. The document Harold had flashed wasn't just a fake threat, it had an official county court stamp on it. The sound of my boots on the gravel was the only thing breaking the silence as I walked into my home office. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. I spread the zoomed-in security camera footage of Harold's document across my desk monitor. There it was, clear as day. A signed county court order granting the HOA emergency access to abate a public nuisance and fire hazard. They weren't just playing neighborhood politics anymore. They had lied to a judge to get a legal backdoor onto my estate. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. It was an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. When I answered, Harold's voice was dripping with synthetic warmth. He told me the $5,000 daily fine had already been logged into their system. He said the county sheriff would be arriving by noon to escort the inspectors inside by force if necessary. I could hear the rustle of papers on his end, the sound of absolute certainty. He thought he had trapped me in a legal corner. He thought a wealthy landowner would rather write a check than fight a lengthy court battle. But I hadn't spent the last 10 years studying property law for nothing. I knew something Harold didn't. I knew that the master developer of their subdivision had tried to absorb my family's land into the HOA boundaries 20 years ago, but the paperwork had a fatal flaw, a flaw so massive it could legally dissolve their entire organization if it ever came to light. I looked out the window and saw a dust cloud rising from a main road. The sheriff's cruiser was pulling up, followed closely by Harold's white crossover. My heart sank as the deputy stepped out of his vehicle, his hand resting casually near his belt. He looked at the gate, then looked up at my house. I grabbed my master deed, walked out the front door, and prepared for the confrontation that would decide the fate of my land. But as I approached the gate, I noticed Harold wasn't looking at me. He was looking at a second, unmarked black SUV that had just pulled up behind the deputy, and his smug smile completely vanished. The black SUV belonged to the regional director of the state's Environmental Protection Division. While Harold had been busy fabricating stories about fire hazards to mislead a local judge, I had been quietly documenting the HOA's actual violations. For months, their massive subdivision had been illegally diverting storm runoff directly onto the lower pasture of my estate, causing severe soil erosion and threatening a protected local wetland. The deputy stood by, observing, as the state official stepped out of the vehicle with a stack of federal enforcement notices. I unlocked the pedestrian side gate, just enough to slip the official deed and the engineering reports through to the deputy. I explained that the HOA was attempting to use a fraudulent court order to gain entry to my land solely to alter the evidence of their illegal drainage system before state investigators could see it. The deputy carefully reviewed the official surveyor maps attached to my deed. He looked at the boundary lines, then looked at Harold, whose face had gone completely pale. The deputy turned to Harold and asked him to produce the original certified copy of the court petition. Harold began shuffling through his clipboard, stammering about administrative delays and board approvals. It was instantly clear to everyone at the gate that the document he had waved around earlier was nothing more than an unfiled draft meant to intimidate me. The deputy shook his head, stepped back into his cruiser, and informed Harold that if any HOA member set foot past my fence line, they would be immediately arrested for criminal trespass. But the nightmare was far from over for the HOA board. The environmental director handed Harold a cease and desist order along with an immediate mitigation fine of $250,000 for the illegal water diversion. Because the HOA had spent their entire reserve fund on aggressive legal battles against other residents, this single environmental fine effectively bankrupted them. Within 3 weeks, the board collapsed, Harold resigned in disgrace, and they never came back to my gate again. The dust from Harold's hasty retreat had barely settled before the true weight of the situation began to set in. While the immediate threat to my gate was gone, the legal paperwork I held in my hands revealed a much deeper conspiracy. The bankrupt HOA wasn't just collapsing under the weight of environmental fines. They were facing a massive class action lawsuit from the very homeowners they had claimed to represent. It turned out Harold and his inner circle had been embezzling the community's monthly dues into a private shell company for over 4 years. I spent the next 2 days working closely with my legal team, drafting a formal quiet title action to permanently sever my estate from any future claims the subdivision might attempt. With the HOA board completely dismantled, there was no one left to contest the filing. The court ruled swiftly in my favor, officially declaring my 80 acres entirely exempt from any past, present, or future neighborhood covenants. The iron gates that Harold had tried so desperately to open were now legally impenetrable. As the months passed, the surrounding neighborhood slowly began to rebuild its leadership under a completely restructured, transparent community group. The new board members reached out to me, not with clipboards or threats, but with a formal apology and a request to cooperate on restoring the damaged wetlands. I agreed on one strict condition: my privacy was absolute. Today, the massive iron gates still stand tall at the edge of the valley, a quiet reminder that true ownership isn't just about a piece of paper. It's about the willingness to stand your ground when the world tries to take it from you.